They left me bleeding on that icy road, and I realized then that blood means nothing when hearts are made of stone. The night it all changed started like any other terrible night in my life. I was driving my beaten-up Honda Civic home from my shift at the roadside diner on Route 40, just outside of Indianapolis. The rain had turned to sleet, and the roads were becoming treacherous. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white, trying to keep the car steady on the slick asphalt. The windshield wipers struggled against the ice forming on the glass, and I could barely see more than a few feet ahead. I had just turned onto the rural stretch leading toward my rundown apartment when I saw the headlights. A massive pickup truck was weaving erratically across the lanes, coming straight toward me. Time seemed to slow down as I yanked the wheel to the right, but it was too late. The screech of brakes pierced the night air, followed by the sickening crunch of metal against metal. Glass exploded around me like 1,000 tiny daggers. I felt my body being thrown, the seatbelt cutting into my chest before something gave way. The world spun. Pain erupted everywhere. When the car finally stopped moving, I found myself halfway out of the driver's side, the door completely torn off. Warm blood was flowing down my face, mixing with the cold rain. My left leg was trapped under twisted metal, and every breath felt like knives in my ribs. I tried to move, tried to pull myself free, but the agony was so intense I nearly blacked out. Then I heard it. A sharp crack and a shower of sparks as a utility pole crashed down about 20 feet away, its wires dancing and spitting electricity across the wet pavement. The danger was everywhere. I needed help. I needed it desperately. Through the haze of pain and rain, I saw headlights approaching. Not just any headlights. I recognized that black Cadillac Escalade immediately. Hope surged through me despite the pain. They would help me. They had to help me. I was their daughter. The Escalade slowed to a stop about 15 feet from my wrecked car. I tried to call out, but my voice came out as a weak rasp. I watched as the passenger window rolled down, and my mother Patricia's face appeared, illuminated by the interior light. But there was no concern in her expression, no fear. Just cold contempt. "Look at you, Nadia," she said, her voice dripping with disgust. "Always causing trouble. Always making everything about you." I could not believe what I was hearing. I coughed, tasting blood, and managed to gasp out, "Mom, please, call 911. I am hurt bad, please." My father Richard leaned over from the driver's seat, and when he saw me lying there in the wreckage, he actually laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound that cut deeper than any physical wound. "A stray dog deserves to die like a stray dog," he said, his eyes cold and merciless. "If you can stand up, maybe you are worth something." But I doubt it. Tears mixed with the blood and rain on my face. "Please," I begged. "I am in so much pain. Please help me. I am your daughter." Richard pointed at me with a dismissive gesture, his face twisted in disdain. "If you die here tonight, it will save us a lot of money and trouble. Tiffany is the one we are investing in. She is worth something. You are just a waste of space and resources." The passenger door opened, and my brother Brandon stepped out into the sleet. He was wearing an expensive tailored suit, and he took a moment to adjust his collar before walking closer to look down at me. His shoes were probably worth more than my entire month's salary at the diner. He stared at me with complete indifference, as if he was looking at roadkill. "She is right," he said, directing his words to our parents but keeping his eyes on me. "Best if she just dies here. She has always been nothing but a burden on this family." "Dead weight," he smirked, a cruel twist of his lips that told me everything I needed to know about how little I meant to them. From inside the car, I heard my younger sister Tiffany's high-pitched giggle. "Is she still alive? How pathetic. Can we go now? I have a party in an hour and I need to change." My mother rolled up the window without another word. My father revved the engine, and the Escalade pulled away, its taillights disappearing into the stormy night. They left me there, bleeding and broken, surrounded by wreckage and live electrical wires, in freezing rain. I lay there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, feeling my strength draining away with my blood. The hatred that bloomed in my chest was almost as painful as my injuries. They had left me to die. My own family, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, had looked at me dying and decided I was not worth the inconvenience of a phone call. But I refused to die. I refused to give them the satisfaction. I started dragging myself away from the wreckage, inch by agonizing inch. My left leg was useless, possibly broken in multiple places. My ribs screamed with every movement, but I kept going, pulling myself through the mud and gravel on the side of the road. I had to get away from those sparking wires. I had to survive. Just when I thought I could not go any further, I saw headlights again. This time it was an old pickup truck, covered in rust and mud. It pulled over immediately, and an elderly man jumped out, his weathered face full of concern. "Oh my God, miss. Hold on. I am calling for help right now," he said, already pulling out his phone. His name was Gus, I would learn later. He was a long-haul trucker who happened to be passing through. He stayed with me, talking to me, keeping me conscious until the ambulance arrived. They took me to County General, not the private hospital where my family had their names on plaques in the lobby. County General was understaffed and overwhelmed, but the doctors and nurses there saved my life. I had 3 broken ribs, a fractured femur, a concussion, and more cuts and bruises than anyone could count. But I survived. I woke up 2 days later in a shared hospital room. The first thing I did was check my phone. There were no calls from my family, no texts asking if I was okay. Nothing. Instead, there was a single message from my mother, sent 12 hours after the accident. It read, "Sign the papers tomorrow. We need your signature for the estate transfer. Don't make this difficult." That was when the last shred of hope I had been clinging to died. They did not care if I lived or died. They only cared about what I could do for them. I was not a daughter. I was not a sister. I was just a signature on a legal document. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, thinking about my entire life. I had always been the outsider in my family. While Brandon and Tiffany got private tutors and went to prestigious schools, I was sent to public school and told to be grateful. While they got new cars for their 16th birthdays, I got a bus pass. While they wore designer clothes, I wore hand-me-downs from cousins. I had convinced myself that if I just worked hard enough, if I just proved myself, they would finally see my worth. But that night on the road had shown me the truth. They would never see my worth because they had decided long ago that I had none. I was not part of their family. I was a mistake they tolerated because they had to. The next morning, my parents showed up at the hospital, not to see how I was doing, not to apologize for leaving me to die. They came because they wanted something from me. Richard walked into my hospital room like he owned the place, Patricia trailing behind him with her nose wrinkled in distaste at the surroundings. He did not even look at my bandages or the casts on my leg. He just pulled a thick folder from his briefcase and dropped it on my lap. "Sign these," he demanded. "Brandon and Tiffany need the estate settled before the end of the quarter. Stop being selfish for once in your life." I opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were documents related to my grandfather's will. My grandfather had died 2 years ago, and I had been too devastated to pay much attention to the legal details. He had been the only person in my family who had ever shown me real kindness. The documents showed that his estate was massive, much larger than I had realized. There were properties, investments, trusts. But there was a clause that required all 3 children to sign off on the distribution. "What happens if I do not sign?" I asked quietly. Richard's face turned red. "Then you are even more worthless than I thought. This is not about you. This is about the family, real family, not the mistake your mother made one drunken night." That was the first time they had said it out loud, though I had always suspected. I was not Richard's biological daughter. That explained everything. The favoritism, the cruelty, the complete lack of love. "Get out," I whispered. "What did you say?" Patricia snapped. "Get out," I screamed, ignoring the pain it caused in my ribs. "Get out and do not come back." They left, but not before Richard threw one more threat over his shoulder. "You will sign those papers, or we will make your life even more miserable than it already is. And trust me, we can." Over the next week, they tried everything. Brandon called me repeatedly, his voice alternating between mockery and veiled threats. "You think surviving that accident makes you strong? You are nothing. Just a pen we will use and throw away. Sign the papers so we can all move on with our lives. You are holding up my investment plans." Tiffany showed up at my crappy studio apartment after I was discharged from the hospital. She walked in wearing a designer outfit that probably cost more than 6 months of my rent, carrying shopping bags from expensive boutiques. "God, this place is disgusting," she said, looking around with obvious revulsion. "Just sign the papers and disappear, Nadia. You do not fit in with us anyway. You never did." But while they were threatening and mocking me, I was planning. I had asked Gus, the trucker who had saved me, to bring me something from my grandfather's old house before the family sold it. There was a safe in his study that only I knew about, because grandfather had shown it to me years ago. Inside were copies of his original will and trust documents, along with letters he had written to me that I had never received. My family had intercepted them. Reading those letters broke my heart and gave me strength at the same time. My grandfather had known how they treated me. He had seen it all. And he had made provisions to protect me, if I was smart enough to use them. The original trust documents revealed something my parents had not told me. Yes, the estate required all 3 children to sign off on certain transfers, but there was another clause. If any of the beneficiaries were alive and legally competent, they had the right to claim their full inheritance independently and manage it through a separate trust. My grandfather had specifically set this up to protect any of his grandchildren from the others. I contacted a lawyer, a young woman named Jennifer Martinez, who had been a friend of my grandfather's and had helped him set up the trust. When I showed her the documents and told her what had happened, her eyes lit up with righteous anger. "They lied to you," she said. "You do not have to sign anything." In fact, you have the power to take control of your entire portion of the estate, which according to these documents, is substantial. Your grandfather loved you, Nadia. He wanted to make sure you were taken care of. Over the next 2 weeks, Jennifer and I worked in secret. We transferred all of my inheritance into a new irrevocable trust with me as the sole trustee. This included not just liquid assets, but properties and investments that my parents had been counting on controlling. We did everything by the book, completely legal and airtight. The documents my parents wanted me to sign were designed to let them control and distribute the assets as they saw fit, essentially cutting me out while using my signature to make it legal. But I was not signing anything. Instead, I was taking what was rightfully mine and making sure they could never touch it. I sold my old car and my few belongings. I closed my bank accounts at the local bank where my parents had connections. I cut up my phone, SIM card, and got a new number. I was disappearing. On my last day in Indianapolis, I went to the family house one final time. I waited until I knew they would all be there for their weekly Sunday brunch. I walked up to the door of the mansion where I had never been truly welcome and slipped an envelope through the mail slot. Then I got into my newly purchased used Toyota Camry and drove away. Inside that envelope was a single sheet of paper with a message I had spent hours crafting. It read, "The real children you value so much will need more than arrogance to survive now. You left me bleeding in the rain once, and I learned that blood is not thicker than water when the hearts are made of stone. You made your choice that night. Now you will live with the consequences. Do not look for me. I am not your problem anymore, or more accurately, you are not mine." I drove for hours, heading west toward Colorado. I had chosen Denver as my new home. It was far enough away and big enough that I could disappear into it. The trust was generating enough income that I did not need to worry about money immediately, but I had no intention of living off it without purpose. For weeks, I heard nothing. I had blocked all their numbers, but I monitored the situation from a distance through Jennifer, who had contacts in Indianapolis. She told me that when my parents discovered what I had done, when they realized that the estate assets they had been planning to control were now locked away in a trust they could not access, they had gone ballistic. Richard had tried to sue, claiming I had stolen from the family. But the documents were ironclad. Jennifer had made sure of that. The judge threw out the case within a week. Not only had I not stolen anything, but the investigation revealed that my parents had been lying about the terms of the trust and attempting to defraud me. Without the estate money they had been counting on, the carefully constructed facade of the Evans family empire began to crumble. They had been living beyond their means for years, taking on debt and making risky investments because they assumed they would have access to grandfather's money to cover everything. Brandon, who had never worked a real day in his life, tried to make money through cryptocurrency investments and day trading. He lost everything within 3 months and borrowed money from the wrong people to try to win it back. He ended up owing money to loan sharks and had to file for bankruptcy. The last I heard, he was working at a call center and living in a 1-bedroom apartment with 2 roommates. Tiffany's downfall was almost poetic. Her entire identity was built on designer clothes, expensive cars, and being seen at the right parties. When the money dried up, her fair-weather friends disappeared. She had to sell her luxury car, then her designer wardrobe piece by piece on resale websites. She posted less and less on social media as her lifestyle degraded, unable to maintain the illusion. Eventually, she moved back in with our parents, working retail to help pay their bills. Patricia tried desperately to maintain appearances, but it was impossible. The country club memberships lapsed. The house, which had a massive mortgage, went into foreclosure when they could not make the payments. They had to downsize to a modest rental home in a middle-class neighborhood. For a woman who had defined herself by her status and wealth, it was devastating. Richard, who had ruled his household like a tyrant, became a shell of himself. Without money and power, he had nothing. He tried to start various business ventures, but his reputation in Indianapolis was ruined. People knew what he had done, how he had treated his own daughter. No one wanted to work with him. Meanwhile, I was building a new life. I enrolled in community college in Denver using my new legal name, Nadia Morrison. I studied social work and nonprofit management. I volunteered at shelters and community centers. I met people who valued me for who I was, not for what I could give them. With the income from my trust, I eventually opened the Morrison House, a residential center for survivors of domestic violence and family abuse. It was a place where people could stay while they got back on their feet, where they could receive counseling, job training, and legal assistance. It was everything I wish I had known existed when I was suffering. The center became my passion and my purpose. I hired staff who understood trauma because they had lived through it. We created programs that actually helped people rebuild their lives. We partnered with local businesses to provide job opportunities. We offered childcare and education programs. The Morrison House became known throughout Denver as a place of genuine hope and healing. I made friends. Real friends who knew my story and supported me anyway. I started dating again. cautiously at first, but eventually I met someone kind and genuine who understood my past and never tried to use it against me. I began to understand what healthy relationships actually looked like. 2 years after I left Indianapolis, on a cold December evening, my phone rang. I almost did not answer because I did not recognize the number, but something made me pick up. Nadia? The voice was hoarse and desperate. It took me a moment to recognize it as Richard's. Nadia, please. We have lost everything. Brandon is gone. He will not talk to us. Tiffany just screams at us. We need help. We need you. Please come home. We are sorry. We are so sorry. I sat there in my comfortable apartment, warm and safe, listening to this man who had left me bleeding on an icy road beg for my help. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to tell him exactly what I thought of him and his apologies. Part of me wanted to lecture him about karma and consequences. But I did neither of those things. I simply sat there in silence, letting him hear the emptiness of my response. After a full minute, when he started crying and begging more desperately, I quietly ended the call. Then I blocked the number. A week later, I sent a card to their rental house address. It was a simple holiday card with no message inside, just a photograph. The photo showed me at the Morrison house, surrounded by the staff and some of the families we had helped. I was smiling, genuinely happy, making a difference in people's lives. On the back of the photo, I had written only one thing: moved on. I wanted them to see that I had not just survived. I had thrived. I had built something meaningful with the resources grandfather had left me, the resources they had tried to steal. I had helped dozens of people escape situations similar to what I had endured. My life had purpose and meaning, and most importantly, I wanted them to know that I did not need them. I did not need their approval, their love, or their acceptance. I had found all of those things in my new life, from people who actually deserved to give them. The silence I maintained was my revenge. Every day I did not contact them. Every day I lived my life happily without them in it was a reminder of what they had lost. Not my inheritance, though that must have stung. They had lost me. And now, when they finally realized what they had thrown away, it was too late. Sometimes I think about that night on the icy road. I think about how terrified I was, how much pain I was in, and how completely they betrayed me. But I do not think about it with pain anymore. I think about it as the night I was reborn. The night I stopped being the unwanted daughter, trying desperately to earn love that would never come. That night, bleeding and broken, I made a choice. I chose to survive. And in surviving, I chose to become someone I could be proud of. Someone my grandfather would be proud of. The Evans family thought they could discard me like trash. They thought my only value was as a signature on their legal documents. They were wrong about everything. I built a life that matters. I help people who have been hurt the way I was hurt. I show them that surviving is not enough. You have to reclaim yourself. You have to decide that you are worth more than the worst thing anyone ever said about you or did to you. Sometimes survivors of the Morrison house ask me how I found the strength to leave my family behind. I tell them the truth. It was not strength that got me through that night on the road. It was anger, pure, burning rage at the injustice of it all. But what came after required real strength. Rebuilding myself, learning to trust again, believing that I deserved good things. That was the hard part. That was the part that took years. I am not going to lie and say I never think about them. Sometimes I wonder if they have learned anything. Sometimes I wonder if they ever truly understood what they did wrong, or if they just resent me for taking what they thought belonged to them. But those thoughts come less and less often now. I have filled my life with people and purposes that matter. The empty space where my family used to be has been filled with something much better. Chosen family. People who showed up for me when I needed them. People I show up for in return. Last month, Jennifer called me with some news. Apparently, Patricia had reached out through a mutual acquaintance, wanting to know if there was any way to reconcile. Jennifer asked what I wanted her to say. I thought about it for a long time. Part of me wondered if I should give them a chance. Maybe they really had changed. Maybe losing everything had taught them the lessons they needed to learn. But then I remembered that night. Not just the physical pain of the accident, but the emotional devastation of watching my mother's face, cold and disgusted, as she looked at me dying. I remembered my father's laugh, Brandon's indifference, Tiffany's giggle. They did not leave me because they thought I would be okay. They left me hoping I would die. And they only wanted me back now because they needed something from me again. Tell them no, I said to Jennifer. Tell them I have moved on with my life, and they are not part of it. Tell them nothing they can say or do will change that. Jennifer paused. Are you sure? This might be your only chance for closure. I already have closure, I replied. I closed that chapter of my life the day I drove out of Indianapolis. I do not need their apology or their explanation. I do not need anything from them at all. And that is the best feeling in the world. So, that is my story. I am Nadia Morrison, founder and director of the Morrison House. I help survivors of family trauma rebuild their lives. I have friends who love me. I have meaningful work. I have peace. The Evans family left me bleeding on a frozen road, thinking I was nothing. They were wrong. I was everything I needed to be. I just had to survive long enough to realize it. And to anyone reading this who sees themselves in my story, who has family that treats them like I was treated, I want you to know something. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. You are not required to sacrifice your well-being for people who do not value you, and you are not wrong for choosing yourself. It is not selfish to save your own life. It is not cruel to walk away from cruelty. It is not heartless to stop giving your heart to people who only break it. The best revenge is not elaborate schemes or public humiliation. The best revenge is building a life so fulfilling that the people who hurt you become completely irrelevant to your happiness. Let them choke on their regrets while you flourish in your freedom. I survived, I thrived, and I never looked back. That is my revenge, that is my triumph. And every single day I wake up in my life, the life I built from the ashes of their betrayal, is another day I win.